Something is trying to get inside my body.
This isn't for your eyes.
You see, I've always wanted a little girl.
Why are you looking at me that way?
What gives horror such a large queer fan base? Well, it's the one genre where outsiders thrive and monsters get put into the spotlight. What appears as monstrous to a mainstream audience can often appear sympathetic, even powerful, to an audience used to a similar weight of stigma and shame.
You only murder boys.
I go both ways.
But in today's world, where queerness is increasingly mainstream and representation is thriving, are we headed to a future where queerness in horror is no longer radical? To help us figure that out, we've summoned some of horror's best experts and familiar faces, all ready to spill their guts about cinema's queerest genre. But to figure out where we're going, first we need to look at where it all began.
Shall we begin?
I love horror because it's gay as hell.
Because it's gay as hell.
It is gay as hell.
Because it's gay as hell.
Because it's gay as hell.
One of horror's main appeals is its ability to allow audiences to confront their anxieties in controlled spaces. A lot of the time, these anxieties are cultural and reflect society's deepest fears. Think The Exorcist. Released in 1973, the film came at a moment when women were gaining unprecedented new rights. Roe versus Wade had just happened, and several equal rights bills were in the midst of being passed. The possession of Reagan, a girl on the cusp of puberty, was often interpreted as a reflection of fears about rising female autonomy.
Your mother sucks in hell.
You know, films, specifically horror films, as long as they've been around, have been a reflection back to society in real time, a mirror being held up as to what's going on.
I think I was first drawn to the horror genre because of the forbidden nature of it. It seemed like something that was naughty or something that we shouldn't be looking at. It's like looking at a car accident or a car crash or something.
Similarly, queerness has at times been painted as the big bad to reflect a cultural fear of homosexuality.
You know, queer people are monstrified. Trans people are the scapegoats for things that they have zero interest in engaging in. They are a convenient scapegoat of community for people who choose to willfully not understand.
Think Norman Bates in Psycho, who dresses as his dead mother to commit a string of murders, believing himself to actually be his mother. Or Angela in Sleepaway Camp, who is revealed to actually be Peter, her seemingly dead twin brother, and who was forced to live as a girl by her aunt. And horror films didn't even have to queer code their stories for the iconic movie monsters to resonate with queer audiences. While mainstream audiences saw danger, immorality, or corruption in these characters, queer viewers often saw something else. They saw themselves.
A lot of times, queer people tend to sympathize with the monster in a movie because they feel like they are the monster in their life. They're made to feel like they're a monster.
Horror attracts people who are different or feel like they can't fit in. The types of people that are attracted to horror are usually people who are not cookie cutter type people.
The idea in and of itself is to shock and confuse and surprise. So it's a comfortable place to be for someone who moves through the world shocking and confusing and surprising.
Monsters in horror were feared precisely because they existed outside the bounds of normal society. They were punished for their differences and often coded as deviant and unnatural. And for queer audiences living under the weight of stigma, shame, and exclusion, that otherness resonated.
And I think as a queer person, my experience, and not to speak for other queer people's experiences, but I think it's relatively safe to say, we don't walk the normal line of what, the regular local person's life experiences. And it's not even necessarily our choice.
We are the weirdos, mister.
Horror has often given queer audiences a safe way to explore their anxieties around rejection, violence, and shame, and often allowed them to reimagine those fears as strength. The lesbian vampire, for instance, was a popular trope once used to cast female same-sex desire as monstrous and unnatural.
It's impossible, it cannot be. Vampires.
Vampires?
Vampires?
Lesbian vampire.
Nice one.
In the mid-30s, 1930s, there was this thing called the Hays Code, and it was basically this declaration that went out to Hollywood that said, we want our television productions, our movies to be morally good, and here's all the things you can and you can't show. And one of the things that the Hays Code almost overtly covers is homosexuality and queerness.
During the Hays Code era, when queer characters did exist, their sexualities were coded and often villainized. One of the ways horror adjusted to this was by using vampires to suggest that just as the undead should be punished for their transgressions, so should queer women.
Why are you looking at me that way? Won't I do? Yes, you'll do very well indeed.
In 1936, Dracula's Daughter gave us one of horror's earliest lesbian vampires.
It is a reboot of Dracula, this film, completely in black and white, that is showing Dracula's daughter fighting her urges to suck the blood of women.
Made monstrous by her repressed desires, she is both ostracized and feared. For many queer audiences, that duality of being seen as dangerous, yet embodying a kind of forbidden allure, resonates deeply.
It only could exist in the genre of horror. Even if the Hays Code didn't exist, it's the type of thing that finds a home in horror because horror in and of itself is so inherently queer.
And it's not just lesbian vampires. Vampires in general have often been read as queer-coded. Fright Night, Interview with the Vampire, Let the Right One In, Dracula, even Nosferatu, made by gay filmmaker F.W. Murnau, have all been read as powerful tales of queer desire.
I think we relate to the otherness of villains or monsters. You know, whether it's Alien or Freddy or Jason, we feel like outcasts ourselves, and we have a rage against the world from not being accepted.
Even if they're doing bad things, right? Like Carrie, in my opinion. Yeah, she massacred her high school, but I think her being bullied and ostracized is something that a lot of people can relate to. I know I can.
Monsters and villains, although they have bad sides to them, they often have a lot of relatable qualities that queer people may relate to, such as feeling like they don't fit in, feeling judged, or having a traumatic past. And when they see these villains on screen, they see these villains finally able to be themselves, even though these villains are not always good people. You don't have to take it so literally.
They're these others, they're these aliens, they're these, you know, these things that have come from outer space. And I think as trans people and as queer people, we're often put into those boxes as well, where I'm often treated like I've come from outer space.
In other words, horror allowed queer people to reclaim the monster. What was meant to terrify could also be empowering, campy, and liberating.
What are you looking for? A gun? No? A drill.
My favorite film franchise of all time, The Strangers. There's the three assailants who are the home invaders, and the one of those three that I've always resonated with the most is the doll face, the blonde character. Why? Couldn't tell you, but there's something that I've always had this affinity towards, just like the mystique, this enigmacy, the unknown.
But in the last decade, something's shifted. Queer people are no longer just identifying with monsters in the shadows. We're now seeing queer characters front and center in horror stories themselves, and they're not always the monster. So, are we living through a queer horror renaissance?
What about you? Do you like girls?
I think that I like TV shows.
Over the last 10 years, we've seen a surge in horror films with explicitly queer narratives. Films like Bodies, Bodies, Bodies and Scream gave us unapologetically queer characters and made queerness a vital part of their stories, whilst Netflix's Fear Street trilogy celebrated a lesbian love story across centuries.
They'll hang us, Sarah. We'll let them hang us then. I was not alive before now anyway.
And in 2025 alone, 3 out of 5 of the summer's major horror theatrical releases include queer characters. I Know What You Did Last Summer gives its main character both same-sex and opposite-sex relationships, whilst both weapons and together casually thread gay couples into the narrative.
I have to see straight people every day. Why not see gay people in my movies too?
Recent indie releases like Clown in a Cornfield and The Ugly Stepsister have also centered queer storylines. According to GLAAD's annual Studio Responsibility Index, we've recently seen some of the highest levels of queer representation in horror ever recorded. The quality of representation has also been markedly better than decades previous. Whilst queer and queer-coded characters have historically suffered from harmful tropes, many queer characters in recent horror go beyond mere monstrosity, becoming main characters and often surviving their ordeals.
I feel like queerness is becoming part of the language in a way that it wasn't before.
The Vito Russo test, created by LGBTQ watchdog GLAAD, can help us understand the way queer characters are included in films. Are they more than their sexuality? Do they matter to the story? And are they free of stereotypes and tropes? Granted, whilst more and more horrors are passing the test these days, some films still fail. Zach Cregger's Weapons, for instance, kills off its only gay characters in brutal deaths far more graphic than most of the film's other fatalities. But others, like Companion, show queerness with real warmth and complexity.
You, Dad. I'm in love with the robot. You're in love with the robot.
2024's I Saw the TV Glow is another example of how current queer horror is thriving.
This isn't the Midnight Realm, Maddie. It's it's just the suburbs.
The story follows Owen, a lonely teenager growing up in 90s suburbia who befriends Maddie, an older girl obsessed with a supernatural TV show called The Pink Opaque. The show, about two teenage girls fighting monsters, becomes a window into a brighter, more meaningful existence than the small town they're trapped in. But as they grow older, the line between fantasy and reality begins to blur. Maddie insists the show is real and they can cross over into its world, whilst Owen clings to the safety of his mundane life. Eventually, the door to escape closes and Owen is left stuck in a body and life that feels wrong for him. The Pink Opaque is a metaphor for queerness and transition, the promise of a more authentic life than the one imposed by society. When Owen chooses not to step through, his story becomes about the suffocating horror of repression.
I think the film very much comes from trying to articulate that feeling of like early transition as like an overwhelming emotional experience, but also like everything that led up to it.
Seeing I Saw the TV Glow, it was such an authentic and such a moving experience. I remember I had an out-of-body experience in theaters. I was sobbing.
It encourages viewers to embrace themselves and don't ignore the thoughts in the back of their heads and just understand that they are allowed to be themselves. I just think it's beautiful representation.
The question is, with queerness no longer just lurking in the shadows, is horror finally evolving? Or is it losing the vital role it once played in letting queer audiences reclaim their strength? We know that horror thrives when it engages with social anxieties, and historically, queerness itself was a source of fear. And whilst harmful on the surface, the monstrous queer created space for audiences to reclaim their marginalization. Nowadays, things look very different. Queer characters make up less of the monsters lurking in the shadows. They're protagonists, survivors, final girls. That's an undeniable step forward. In the last decade, marriage equality has passed in much of the West, queer characters are everywhere on screen, and more young people identify as LGBTQ+ than ever. But could it be that without the same unique opportunity for release that horror once provided, that horror's queerness has been flattened into something safer and more palatable? Has horror lost its queer bite? So the question now is, what does this mean for queer horror fans who used to see their own fear, struggles, and power reflected in the genre? There is a possibility that we are headed toward a future where queerness in horror is normalized but no longer radical, where it risks losing its ability to give queer audiences a way to connect and see themselves in ways only horror can give.
And so I think just making sure that we're still allowing queer people to be bad and challenge society and do all of these amazing things that we've seen monsters and villains and bad guys in horror do for so long, but without that kind of belittling and being put in a box of, well, they're bad because they're queer. Because that's never really been the story.
I think now it's coming into a time where, oh yeah, we still feel other, we still relate to the monster, but we also can have the film be about ourselves. We can be the main character. Why shouldn't we be the hero? Why should we only relate to the monster and to the otherness of the whole thing?
The good news is that queer representation is for the most part flourishing, and recent films like I Saw the TV Glow, Companion, and others in the indie circuit are showing that queerness has more of a place in horror than ever. And it's not just film. Queer horror is thriving on TV too. Recent hits like Yellowjackets and The Last of Us have carved out space in the mainstream, showing that audiences are hungry for stories that center queerness in all its messy, powerful complexity. The challenge now is to keep pushing boundaries, to make sure that in celebrating representation, we don't lose the fear, the bite, and the unrestraint that made horror resonate with queer audiences in the first place.
I definitely think we need more queer people behind the camera, and then once we have enough, then we will be in a true queer horror renaissance.
I think there's a certain braveness to being able to watch a horror movie and to make it through and to not leave the theater. And so being queer or being straight, you can still have that braveness, and it gives you strength, it gives you power in a world where you feel a little powerless.
Ever since I joined the horror community, I've never felt more accepted, whether it's because I'm queer or because I love horror movies.
It allows me access to face fears that otherwise I'm unable to do so in the day-to-day life, in a form of escapism.
I don't think any other genre could do what horror movies can do.
I think it's just more important now than ever to look back at our history and the history of queer horror and see that queerness has always been there, will always be there, and horror will always be a home for queerness, and it will always be somewhere we can return back to.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the Pink News YouTube channel for more like this on the way.